What if someone asked you, why do you believe the Bible? Well, what would you say? Would you be ready to engage? In this segment entitled, For the Bible Tells Me So, I've asked Brad Arnett, professor of New Testament and Greek, to speak to you on this issue. When it comes to the question of what we believe, we evangelical Christians offer the Bible as our foundation for faith and practice. But why do we believe the Bible? It's a compelling book, yes, but so are other books. The question really is it true? And the second question to follow that up is, how do we know it is true? Let's start with the existence of God. As the previous segment established, we've had many good, sound reasons for believing in the existence of God. Building on this truth, we can move into talking about who this God is. First, we would say He is the Creator. Now think about this. A God who creates, ipso facto, reveals Himself, at least in a general sort of way. God's act of creation gives His creatures access to knowing Him, at least in part. That's revelation, self-disclosure. We can know something about the Creator by observing His creation. For example, God created large creatures and microscopic creatures. He created rocks and trees. He created color and music. He created humanity. All of these designs tell us something about the designer. Now, a creator of living beings who possess the ability to communicate with one another, that creator may very well choose to communicate with those creatures beyond mere general revelation of Himself through creation. Indeed, doesn't it stand to reason that He would communicate to them? Logically, yes. So, what would it look like if He did? And does history reveal that He has? A creator God who has fashioned a world from nothing, a world, mind you, in which He is not confined, could choose to send a message to that world via any number of media. But the most likely way to get attention would be through doing something extraordinary. Now, some extraordinary events can be classified as miracles. Now, do we have any records of miracles occurring in history? We do. We actually have lots of them from all sorts of religious and non-religious traditions. Now, I'm not suggesting that all claims to the miraculous are legitimate. But could some of them be? I think so. Historical accounts that record a miraculous event without fanciful or highly nuanced features beg us to consider, for the sake of the argument, let's add the qualification that if any miracles are legitimate, then they also would be verifiable. That is, they will have supporting evidence that they occurred. Now, let me give you an illustration or a working analogy for this. When you throw a rock into a pond, it makes a splash, right? And from that splash, there are ripples. Those ripples continue out until some force causes them to cease, such as the shoreline. Now, let's say that someone threw a rock in the pond while you were not looking. You didn't see the splash, but you can see the ripples. You can confidently conclude that an object made a splash. I would like to suggest that the Old Testament is a collection of, quote, ripples resulting from the splash of the Exodus event, the miraculous event of God's deliverance of the children of Israel from Egypt and the formation of a new nation. Of course, the Old Testament is more than that, but not less. Without the splash of the Exodus, Israel would not exist, nor would its law, written by Moses, its historical records of the judges and kings, its poetry and wisdom, or its prophecies calling for a return to Yahweh. I would also like to propose that the New Testament is a collection of ripples resulting from the splash of the Jesus event.
Now this includes everything from His baptism to His ascension, but special focus is on the miracle of the resurrection. For without the splash of the resurrection, the church would not exist, nor its gospels, its historical account in Acts, or its epistles, or its prophecy in Revelation. So let's recap. We have the Bible, made up of two testaments. The Old Testament is the result of the Exodus event, which was recorded by eyewitnesses and provides an explanation of the formation of Israel and its scriptures. The New Testament is the result of the resurrection of Jesus, which was also recorded by eyewitnesses and explains the formation of the church and her scriptures. Superintending this process is the Creator God, who intended to communicate a message or messages to His creatures. He performed the miracles and He interpreted it through eyewitnesses. So, now let's consider their testimony. Why should we be compelled to believe the testimony? What is it about the testimony that makes it believable? First, I would argue that their testimony is what I would say excruciating. That is, they paid a price for believing and sharing their experience. Moses' entire life was changed. He went from being a shepherd to having a face-off with the Pharaoh of Egypt. The 12 disciples of Jesus all suffered martyrdom or exile as a result of sharing the gospel. They could have avoided so much suffering had they just said that they made it all up, but they didn't. Second, I would argue that their testimony is embarrassing. Moses was reluctant to go in the first place. He gets angry with the people. He sins. He doesn't even get to go into the promised land. It's very embarrassing when the recognized leader is a, quote, failure. Yet that's exactly the testimony. It's not pretty. It's not exalting. It's not fanciful. And that makes it all the more believable. Same for the New Testament. Read the Gospels. The 12 disciples are slow to learn. They make huge mistakes. They deny Jesus. One of the 12 even betrays Jesus. They don't believe at first. It's embarrassing. But then they experience the resurrected Jesus, and they are completely different. Bold, courageous, willing to stand up to the authorities, willing to suffer for His name's sake. Something miraculous, they say, has happened, and they can't help but tell it to the whole world. Third, I would throw in that nothing archaeologically or historically disproves the testimony. While we've not discovered or unearthed some artifacts we would love to have, what we have uncovered verifies, not contradicts, the Bible's record. Other considerations could be added here, but these three characteristics of the testimony of the Old Testament and New Testament should suffice to support our basic claim. We have sufficient reason to believe the Bible. But someone might ask you, isn't the English Bible you use a mere translation of a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy of the original Bible? The answer to that is yes, it is both a translation and a copy. But there is justification for saying that it is accurate. Let's break down this question of accuracy into two issues. The first is translation, and the second is transmission. Some people get a bit overwhelmed at all the translations and versions of the Bible we have. There are about 5 really popular English translations, but there are a plethora of others, some of which you may have never heard of. Can we trust them? Yes, but only insofar as they represent the original languages and best manuscripts. If you went to a foreign country and you wanted to communicate with the nationals, you would need an interpreter, right? The same thing is true for you if you can't read the Greek and Hebrew of the Bible. You need an interpreter. And not just any interpreter, but one who is fluent in both languages, one who has integrity, one who is trustworthy. The same is true for translators. Are they competent in the languages? Are they committed to the integrity and trustworthiness of the Scriptures? And another consideration when it comes to translations of the Bible, are they working alone or are they working as a team and checking each other's work? Consider these elements as you select a Bible version. The second issue is transmission. This is a historical question, and it goes something like this. Were the original writings of the Old Testament and New Testament transmitted through copies that are faithful and accurate? Well, if I could go back in time, I would take a Xerox machine. We live in an era where we can make exact copies of documents. Millions of them, millions of copies. The ancients had no such luxury. If they wanted a copy of a book, they had to get it copied by hand. Some people, called scribes or copyists, would do this as a profession, and you could pay them. Some of that happened, I think, with the Old Testament and even with the New Testament. If you looked at some of the manuscripts, it would be clear to you that not all of the copyists were pros. They made mistakes. And when you consider how many hand-copied manuscripts still exist today and how many variations they have from one another, you might be overwhelmed. Yet, the huge majority of these, quote, errors of transmission are spelling errors, words out of place, skipped words or phrases, and the like. Only a few of the, quote, variants have any real significance. Because of the overwhelming agreement, we can confidently say that our existing manuscripts, while not the original writings, are still faithful representatives of the originals. We maintain that the originals were God-breathed, inspired, and inerrant, and that it is a worthy enterprise to compare the copies we do have to reconstruct as best as we can the original wording of the Scriptures. So, in conclusion, let's summarize. The Creator God chose to reveal Himself to humanity, which He loves and seeks as His own. He got our attention by two major events, the Exodus and the resurrection. And through those events, He initiated communications that spell out who He is and what He expects. We will do well to know what He has said and take it to heart.
Thanks again for joining us for this lesson. We hope that this bird's eye view of the nature of the biblical testimony has helped you prepare to engage those around you who may be wondering why the Bible is so important.